Assalamu alaikum, fam. Hope you're doing well. Let's continue Nietzsche's The Spoke Zarathustra, the man, the myth, the legend. Okay, let's continue. We're in part 3. Let's begin. Whoever is the wisest among you is also a mere conflict and a cross between plant and ghost. But do I bid you become ghosts or plants? So, ghosts is kind of see-through. It's not significant. Not really recognized by others, whereas a plant has growing potential. Interesting. Behold, I teach you the overman. The overman is the meaning of the earth. Let your will say, the overman shall be the meaning of the earth. I beseech you, my brothers, remain faithful to the earth, and do not believe those who speak to you of otherworldly hopes. So, here this is interesting, because Zarathustra is from, he's supposed to be this enlightened being in the woods, so he's more nature-y guy. Remember how he argued with the saint, and the saint was dealing with the other world? So do you see the contrast here? We have Zarathustra, who's of the earth, as a character, and the saint, who was more talking about otherworldly. So this thing that he is saying here is very unique to his specific character, in line with his character. Poison mixers are they, whether they know it or not. Despisers of life are they, decaying and poison themselves, of whom the earth is weary, so let them go. So this is interesting. Poison mixers, he calls them. Despisers of life. He's calling those who contemplate the otherworldly realm and have hope as despisers of life. And he's saying it as something negative, right? Decaying and poison themselves. So because they're not enjoying, as he feels they should, as becoming the overmen, they are decaying. Let's see what he says. Once the sin against God was the greatest sin, but God died, and these sinners died with him. So here, what I learned about this statement is it doesn't mean literal. Sort of a symbolic where the people gave up. You stopped practicing. For me, I always like to think of it as the end times, where things are so crazy, there's no more righteousness left anymore. And when there's no more righteousness anymore, you become beastly. When you become beastly, you become animalistic. When you become animalistic, you're of the earth. You see it? You see? To sin against the earth is now the most dreadful thing, and to esteem the entrails of the unknowable higher than the meaning of the earth. So esteem the entrails. That was the I remember reading about, like, the Greek priests used to examine goat entrails and try to predict who's going to win a battle. It's very crazy, So that's a jab at the Greeks and such, which is funny because there's a saint in the story. Right? Once the soul looked contemptuously upon the body, and then this contempt was the highest. She wanted the body meager, ghastly and starved. So here, this is okay. What is he getting at here? Some monks, they abused themselves, right? They starved themselves. Sometimes you would see these Buddhist statues where the Buddha is very skinny, like he's emaciated. So they feel like, this sort of really starving yourself, purifying yourself, not focusing on exercise and strength. Remember, the overman has, one could argue, as some have argued, the more, I don't want to say Neanderthal, but more of like a Tarzan energy, right? Where it's like healthy and vital. A mountain man, right? I don't want to say Superman, because every time someone says Superman, I think of the character who flies in blue tights, right? But somebody who is like, they're eating their mashed potatoes, Whereas here, he's saying some of these holy pious people look like vampires, Like, that's supposed to be righteousness? You're starved and emaciated, right? It's pretty much taking a jab at some religions. But the good thing about Islam is Muslim men are not encouraged to fast, but not to become this sort of like, right? Your body has rights over you in Islam. So we Muslims are not included, I don't think, in this jab, right? Thus, she hoped to escape it and the earth. So this is interesting. Trying to escape the earth by neglecting the flesh, right? Some people did think like that in the past. Oh, this soul herself was still meager, ghastly and starved, and cruelty was the lust of this soul. Cruelty. So when you do, or when you're yourself meager, when you're not, filled with vitality, you do kind of become cruel, because you're being cruel to yourself, you see? If you can starve yourself and accept that you're ghastly and meager, you're cruel to your own self. So of course they think you can be cruel to someone else, whereas somebody like a pacifist hippie Buddhist could say like, no, I may starve myself and go on hunger strikes, but I will not harm even a bug. So you can see the way you can go with it. But you too, my brothers, tell me, what does your body proclaim of your soul? Is it not your soul poverty and filth and wretched contentment? I mean, think about this. Someone saying, this is what's interesting about him, is he's coming at you with questions, right? He's declaring this to people. And they're, imagine if you went to someone and started saying these things, what would they do to you? Some guy from the mountains comes down and says these things, you'd be like, hey, what's he talking about? Right? He's getting your brain thinking. What does your body claim of your soul? What does your soul claim of your body? It's interesting. Poverty and filth and wretched contentment. Verily, a polluted stream is man. One must be a sea to be able to perceive a polluted stream without becoming unclean. So here you talk about flow, right? A stream that's meager, right? Gets clogged, you can spot the impurities more. And a sea is the volume of itself. Even allows the sediments to flow in different parts, right? Has more of a power current. So notice that over men, these waves, they unfold, an unfolding character, a constant overcoming. The sea is constantly flowing, right? There's more pressure behind it, right? Whereas a stream is more like trickle, 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 trickle. It's more meager, right? So it has these interesting analogies. So the polluted stream is man. So man is like this stream that is not yet like the ocean, and the ocean is going to be more like the sea, rather, like the overman. So a man who tries to become the overman. Do you see the connections he does here? He's really great writing, by the way. Behold, I teach you the overman. He is the sea, exactly, yes. So this is something that is very unique about Nietzsche's writing, is you have to take all the pieces, you put it together, and you can identify the metaphors and the sort of allegorical hints and double meanings behind each type of wordplay he does within his sentences. Shakespeare's like this as well. And him your great contempt can go under. Exactly. So the stream, which is man, who has filthy, wretched contentment, he's meager, he's starved. The sea isn't starved, the sea is overflowing. You see the difference? So if man is this starved stream, and the overman is the overflowing sea, obviously the sea can overcome the stream with its force. And such, the overman can overcome man with such force. Right? Very interesting, Nietzsche. Doesn't mean you believe everything he says. You don't apply everything to your life. You just enjoy it as like literature. What is the greatest experience you can have? It is the hour of the great contempt. The hour in which your happiness, too, arouses your disgust, and even your reason and your virtue. This is interesting. So the great hour of contempt. Something that also you're happiest when you also have the disgust. So it's duality. Some pompous thing, and then later you get disgusted by it. Very interesting. The hour when you say, what matters, my happiness, is poverty and filth and wretched contentment. I like how he says that, right? The soul of poverty, see, is not your soul poverty and filth of wretched contentment? And here he says again that my happiness is poverty and filth and wretched contentment. Like, he says but my happiness ought to justify existence itself. Interesting. Happiness oughtifying your justice. The hour when you say, what matters my reason? Does it crave knowledge as the lion his fore? It is poverty and filth and wretched contentment. It's like so. This guy. The hour when you say, what matters my virtue, and yes, it has not made me rage. Now this is interesting. Virtue holding you back from rage. Because if you are virtuous, you will not commit a rage. Right? To be virtuous is to rein in that rage. Right? If you are in a compelling rage, you will slip up and lack mercy. Therefore, if it doesn't have mercy, you will not be virtuous. You follow? How weary I am of my good and my evil, and all that is poverty and filth and wretched contentment. So here you're starting to see the pattern, right? He's mentioned it quite extensively. So pay attention when something repeats a lot, you're meant to reflect upon it. The hour when you say, what matters my justice? I do not see that I am flames and fuel, but the just are flames and fuel. Look at that. What matters my justice? I am flames and fuel. I am not flames and fuel. Think about what this would mean for yourself. The just are flames and fuel. So the just, they are the ones who keep the flame of justice alive, but at the same time, they can fuel it. Very interesting. The hour when you say, what matters my pity? Is not pity the cross on which he is nailed who loves man? Interesting. So pity as a cross that you get nailed to. You get stuck to pity. When you have pity, you kind of feel like you're stuck there, and it's a little bit agonizing, like, oh. You see it and you just become like, oh. It punctured your happiness. And it does feel like a heavy burden. Some people, like if you would walk with a cross, it's heavy, right? If you get hung on a cross, it hurts, So, this is something that is very emotional in a way, right? But my pity is no crucifixion. Have you yet spoken thus? Have you yet cried thus? Oh, that I might have heard you cry thus. Not your sin, but your thrift cries to heaven. Not your sin, but your thrift. To be thrifty is to kind of know this fair exchange and swift acquisition of something, right? It's to be thrifty. Like if you go to a thrift store, there's things that are sold from second hand. To be thrifty is almost like to be, like if you say, you're very thrifty with your items. You can get it here, get it there, it's just moving, right? So, your sin doesn't cry to heaven, but your thrift does. Your meanness, even in your sin, cries to heaven. Your meanness. Wow. The meanness cries. That one is a trippy one. Because the meanness cries to heaven. Is it you doing it, or is it as something separate doing it? Talking about you need to soften yourself. Have a sense of mercy. Because if you have the meanness, remember, the wretchedness of contentment, wretched contentment, the meanness of your soul, thriftiness crying to heaven. This is interesting. So notice the pattern here. What matters my virtue? What matters my justice? What matters my pity? He has three things he's asked here. What does it matter? So he's examining it and making you wonder. Very thought-provoking. I hope you enjoyed.